Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on another sunny day. My name is Vicki DeBlasi. I'm the head of marketing at UK 5G. And this morning we are joined by a fantastic group of panelists and speakers for this session, which we will be running as an introduction to Open RAN. So in terms of what we've got to look forward to this morning, we are joined by Julie from Real Wireless, who's going to be giving us an overview of Open RAN, explaining technically what it means and how it works. We're then joined by Tom Rumbelow from DCMS, who is going to be explaining why this matters to the UK and the broader diversification strategy of UK government. And then Julie and Tom will be joined by Paul Clegg and Nick Wiggin from DCMS for a panel session and Q&A. So by this point, we've all been on lots of virtual events together, but we really do want to make this as interactive as we can. So as we're going through, as people are presenting, if you've got questions for specific individuals, or if you've got questions that you would like to put to the group as a whole, please do put your questions in at the chat and we'll make sure that we answer them during that Q&A session. So before we jump into our speakers, I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking you through UK 5G for those of you who might not be familiar with us. So we are an impartial innovation network. We are funded by Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, but we operate as an independent entity, and our role essentially is to drive the adoption and deployment of 5G across the UK. We do this in a number of different ways, but essentially we work with all sides of the ecosystem. So the telecom sector, but also with organizations, sectors that can benefit from 5G, including obviously places and local authorities. A large part of what we do, therefore, is about making sure that those people and organizations that can benefit from 5G understand what it is, what they can do with it, and how to essentially harness the full potential of it. We are a membership organisation, so we have over 5,000 registered users now that come from just shy of 2,000 organisations. And we have a really active comms engine. So we have a website that is updated on a daily basis with news articles, resources, case studies, event listings. We issue a quarterly print magazine, and we have newsletters and active social media channels. So whilst obviously I would say this, if you aren't signed up as a member, we'd really recommend that you do register on the site. It's really easy to do it. You can see there's a join button just on the top right hand corner of the homepage, and it's a great way to kind of access not only the kind of great content, but also the broader sort of network of individuals and organizations who are out there doing things, trying things, and can answer any questions and help you with anything that you are potentially struggling with or looking to do on your own advanced connectivity journey. So that's a little bit about UK 5G. Without further ado, let's dive straight in. And I'm very pleased to welcome Julie Bradford, who is going to kick us off with an Open RAN 101. So Julie, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Vicki. Good morning, everyone. Let me just bring up the slides. Okay. So thank you, Vicki, and good morning, everyone joining today's session. My name is Julie Bradford, and I work for a company called Real Wireless. Just in case you haven't come across Real Wireless before, we're a UK-based team of independent advisors in wireless technology. So we're not affiliated with any particular vendor or operator. And we typically work with people who want to make use of wireless to help them navigate their way through the different options that are there, sort of pros and cons of different wireless options. And my area of expertise is in techno-economics of wireless options. So it's very much looking at cost-benefit analysis of different wireless strategies and options, and more recently working with a number of city councils around their wireless options and wireless strategies going forwards. So in today's session, I'm just going to give a bit of an introduction, very high level introduction to Open RAN, and given the audience that we have as well, just try and make this relevant as well to local authorities. So trying to start off with, just outline, why is it useful for local authorities to actually have some awareness of Open RAN and mobile technologies. Isn't it something that perhaps we should leave to the industry to look after? So perhaps some motivation, I guess, for getting a bit more knowledge in this area and a bit of awareness, so we can make the most of it. Then the meat of the presentation, the central part of what is Open RAN, and I'll just wind back from that a little bit initially and talk about the RAN. So what is the RAN, or the radio access network in mobile networks, and what type of cell sites do we see in that radio access network today? And then going forwards, what's the motivation for moving on from what we have today towards this more diverse and open approach and architecture called Open RAN. And then just to conclude, I'll circle back again and just revisit, what do these developments, what does Open RAN typically mean for places and different regions, and in particular for local authorities. And I think a big impact, as we've got here, ideally will be on the physical appearance of mobile telecom sites going forwards. Okay, so to kick off, why is it useful for local authorities to have some awareness of trends and technologies around cellular, and in particular this new, relatively new initiative called Open RAN. So I think something that hopefully a number of you in the audience, if you're part of planning teams, something that you will recognise is there's a growing number of applications for new mobile masts coming into planning teams across the country at the moment, as we roll out new infrastructure and work towards the rollout of 5G networks. And I think as we see more and more generations of mobile technology being added to sites, these applications are becoming more and more of a challenge, more difficult to actually assess for planning teams. And I think the planners are typically caught in this balance, and this treading this very fine line between wanting to engage with the wireless industry and wanting to ensure that their areas have the best wireless connectivity, and that the area benefits from everything that connectivity can offer, and that they don't hold up the rollout and the progress of new technologies like 5G, but also that we respect the streetscape and the environments that we have in our various areas that are within our jurisdiction. And I think some of the images of mast sites on the right hand side here show what's typically happening with a lot of sites. And the one on the bottom left here, in particular, one Streetworks site, shows masts getting taller, more and more cabinets coming in, and I think it's questionable whether this situation can be maintained. So I think there's a motivation there to try and understand how can we work together to build wireless into our environments in a way that doesn't hold up the rollout of technology, but respects the streetscape. I think as well there's something to be said around using wireless technology to stimulate and create innovation hubs within particular areas. And I know a number of local authorities have been investing in their own wireless infrastructure So Sunderland is the one that gets mentioned quite a lot, but there are others who have been deploying their own private networks or sets of infrastructure. And I think, for local authorities looking this direction to actually deploy some of your own infrastructure, or even just in procuring wireless services as users of wireless services, it's good to understand some of the trends in mobile and in wireless technology, so that when you're procuring these services or procuring these networks and pieces of infrastructure, there's some awareness there of elements that would be nice to include in those invitations to tender that are being put out there. So I think those are kind of a couple of reasons from my experience of working with local authorities why Open RAN is an interesting area and worthwhile finding out a bit more about. So getting into what is Open RAN, I say just backtracking a little bit to make sure we're all on the same page initially. This slide just looks at what does RAN stand for. We hear the term RAN, and that stands for the radio access network. So the radio access network in mobile networks is in effect the equipment, the range of equipment and connections between that equipment that generate the mobile phone network that basically generates the wireless signals to your handset. And the diagram on the right here just gives a very rough overview of some of the typical elements that we find in that radio access network today. So we're very much talking about the mobile telecoms masts, complete with antennas, some radio units, which sometimes are mounted on the mast, sometimes they're down in a cabinet at the bottom, and then usually some base station equipment in an actual cabinet nearby. And we have a whole range of different forms, the form factors that these masts can take, from sort of standalone masts to rooftops, to street poles, and to increasingly the rollout of small cells. And I guess kind of two things about the architectures that we have at the moment within the radio access network. Typically, there's proprietary interfaces between the different elements here on the site and running back into the core network. And that means that solutions are typically procured by the mobile network operators from a single vendor, and it's very difficult for other smaller vendors to kind of break into that market. I guess the benefit to the mobile network operator of having a single vendor that they're procuring the service from is that you've got one point of contact then for managing and operating that network, and if there is a fault in the network, then you can go to that vendor to resolve that issue. But it does lead us to a problem where we've seen consolidation of the number of vendors in the industry, and a limited number of vendors, which leads to a limited amount of choice, and something that that mobile network operators are increasingly concerned about, and keen to start to diversify this ecosystem more. So that's some of the setting. And worth pulling out as well, just this pie chart on the bottom left here, which is a very rough sort of split, just showing you where, when you look at the total cost of ownership of a mobile network, just showing you where the lion's share of those costs lie. So this is both capital investment and the ongoing operational costs of a network. And very much it's the radio access network that takes up the majority of the expenses and the costs for mobile network operators. So there's an awful lot of emphasis on trying to get the technology right and deploying these cells in the most cost-effective way possible, because as you can see, the radio access network really is the most costly element in mobile networks for the operators. Okay, so just to sort of put that block diagram into context a little bit more and bring these things to life. So when we talk about the equipment that's on cellular sites today, these are a few images which I've taken from a chap a few of you might follow called Peter Clark. Peter's very good at publishing and walking people through different pictures of sites and deployments. But here we've got a rooftop site, and you can see here the antenna panels, these sort of large rectangular panels. You can see the cable trays here with the feeder cables to those antennas, microwave dishes for connecting the site back into the rest of the network. And then on the site in the middle here, we can actually see some of the radio units mounted alongside the antennas here. And then in a streetworks scenario that we've got on the right-hand side here, we've got the antennas at the top, and then a number of cabinets at the bottom. This particular installation is for two operators, a number of generations of technologies. And for that reason, you see quite a few cabinets here housing the radio equipment and the base station equipment. So that's very much what sites tend to look like today. I think there have been some efforts in the past to try and, I guess, unlock that proprietary situation that we have in mobile networks and to try and open it up a bit. And the first step in this really was to try and separate what happens in the base station equipment from the actual the radio units on site. And you might have heard of an interface called CPRI. Stands for the Common Public Radio Interface, and the idea was that this would be an open interface, so that you could have one vendor for the radio units and another vendor for the base station equipment. Now, what's happened with CPRI in practice is that CPRI it defines certain elements of that interface, but the way that the signaling and the control information is actually implemented and transported across the interface does get wrapped up typically in some proprietary technology from the vendors. So actually just having equipment that's got a CPRI interface on it hasn't quite solved the problem, and we still get systems which have CPRI in them and which might well separate the base station from the mast, but they still typically have to be implemented by the same vendor, because that CPRI interface tends to be proprietary to the vendor of the base station and the radio units. I guess the thing that this has allowed for is something called sort of centralizing some of the architecture. So that means moving the base station equipment away so that we don't necessarily need as many cabinets and as much processing going on actually at the mast site. And sometimes you hear of deployments being a so-called CRAN deployment, or sort of a centralized RAN deployment, where we start to move the base station away from the mast itself. So there's some implications there with the introduction of CPRI for the physical makeup of sites, and hopefully decluttering it to a certain extent. But it still mean we're kind of locked into the same limited set of vendors. So Open RAN goes a bit further than we had in CPRI, and it tries to be a bit more ambitious. So what we do in Open RAN is where we had previously the base station, which the base station is carrying out a number of functions. And I won't go into each of these in too much detail, but there's basically a layered signal chain going on within the base station. And what Open RAN tries to do is actually break out some of these layers and say, okay, well, let's start to define the interface between some of these layers, so that actually we could have one vendor delivering the physical layer, another vendor delivering the MAC layer, the multiple access control layer, and so on. as well as trying to standardize things like the interface to the radio units, so as we can have separate providers for the radio units, and it all becomes a lot more diversified, ideally, because of this Open RAN initiative of defining these interfaces. The other thing that we want to do in Open RAN, it's connected to a theme that you might have heard of called the virtualization or the softwareization of mobile networks. So in our sort of current cell sites, with the base station equipment is typically implemented on digital signal processors and bespoke chipsets or accelerators. So hardware that has been developed specifically to perform these functions. And while there is some software in the base station equipment and you can do software upgrades, it does limit us to a certain extent how much we can upgrade and change what's going on in the base station, and also how much other vendors can start to provide some of this functionality. So in this trend of virtualization or softwareization means that we're trying to make mobile networks look a lot more like IT networks. We're trying to make the functions that are happening in a base station look a lot more like the software modules running on generic processing platforms. So the likes of Intel with their general purpose processors, now just providing racks of servers on which we can run some of the base station elements just as software modules, and as well as diversifying and trying to define the interfaces between the software modules. Open RAN is also trying to diversify the types of processors that these racks forming the base stations might contain. And there's a whole range of those. I've put Intel and ARM on here just to illustrate one of the projects which we happen to be involved with as part of the DCMS Frank project, where Parallel Wireless are actually developing some of their physical layer modules, and in that project trying to show that physical layer module could run equally well on an Intel processor or an ARM processor and be moved about without any sort of degradation in performance. So we're trying to diversify the number of people that can provide these layers of functionality within the base station, diversify the hardware that they run on, and also some of the other equipment elements as well, such as the radio units. There is also this sort of breaking out of the base station happening in our architectures at the moment, where we split the base station into something called a distributed unit. So that's basically putting your racks and your server blades in a location that's reasonably close to a cluster of masts, and that's done so that you can reduce the delay basically between the site and the processing, and you might need that for some particular applications. There's sort of different technical reasons why you might want to do that, and then those distributed units, which are doing the processing on a more localized basis, then feed into these so-called centralized units, which will do some more of the higher layer processing across groups of distributed units. So what does this look like in terms of the overall architecture? Well, hopefully it means that we're moving across to networks which look a lot kind of lighter at the actual masts, where we just have the antennas and the radio equipment built into the masts, and the actual base stations look a lot more like an IT based servers. And we have this range of distributed units, centralized units, all running into a core network. And ideally, sort of moving across to these more kind of softwareized open architectures means that we can start to plug and play and put new functionality into the networks more readily. And that kind of helps us to move across to this image of 5G, or the original image of that we had of 5G, where it should be a network that can deliver a whole range of services, not just the extreme consumer-focused broadband services that we kind of see on networks today, but also support for Internet of Things and also ultra-reliable connectivity. So as we kind of softwareize the network more and make it easier for other vendors to come in and contribute specialist functionality into the network, then I think it should make it easier for us to realize that ambition, that true ambition of 5G, and having more specialist services as well. So that's a very quick introduction to the motivation for Open RAN, and just trying to make it relevant, I guess, to physically what it means on sites. Just to wrap up, I'll kind of circle back and say, what does all this mean to local authorities and the places where we all live and work. And I think the first one for me is that hopefully there's a perfect storm kind of gathering here, where I would hope there'll be a step change in the way that mobile telecoms masts sort of look and feel on our streets, on our rooftops, in fields around the country. I know, speaking to planning teams, a point that is brought up sometimes is you have planners working for a long time in the industry, and they say, well, we never really see much change in the look and the feel of the planning applications that are being put in from the wireless industry. Surely these masts can evolve to be something that is more aesthetically pleasing. And I think with softwareization, virtualization, diversification within mobile networks, also the rise of more sharing of infrastructure and neutral hosts, all of these things are kind of coming together to actually generate an environment where I think the motivation and the capability is there to change the look and feel of masts, so that they are something that are a lot lighter, less cabinets, and something akin to a couple of the deployments which have been recently announced in Leeds and Birmingham. So the top one here is from BT, a sort of small cell network, as you can see here. All the equipment is kind of built into the mast at the bottom here. We haven't got the cabinets. This one here from Wireless Infrastructure Group from WIG in Birmingham supports multiple operators. Also planned to support a private layer for demonstrating autonomous vehicles in Birmingham as well. And this very much just has the antenna and the radio units with all that sort of base station processing being done off-site, kind of giving you much cleaner, slicker looking sites. I think the other areas and other benefits coming through, if we can diversify and have greater choice of hardware platforms, ideally that will reduce costs for the operators, drive more power efficient solutions, and reduce our reliance on single suppliers. And I guess, to a certain extent, they're all they are direct benefits for the mobile network operators and the mobile service providers. But I think, if there's cost reductions for the mobile network operators, hopefully they'll be able to reinvest some of that in solutions around the look and feel of masts, and how these are deployed going forwards. I think as well, with the greater choice of software modules within the base station, we get all of the above benefits again, those reduced costs, power efficiency, and so on. But I think as well, if we can encourage the use of flexible and open RAN infrastructure in our areas, then it leaves the door open there for innovation, and potentially for local companies and universities to add some of their software modules into these infrastructure sets, and for the whole thing to kind of become a bit of an innovation hub, where hopefully local businesses can really showcase their capabilities. So that's everything I had from my side. I hope I kind of kept reasonably to time there for you, Vicki. I'll hand back across.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Julie. Really helpful kind of overview of what Open RAN actually is and what that might mean for local authorities. So I'm very pleased now to welcome Tom Rumbelow up to join us. He is from DCMS and is going to talk to us a little bit about, you know, we've heard what Open RAN is, but what about the big picture? What does this actually mean when we look at overall telecom strategy for the UK? So Tom, over to you, please.
Thanks, Vicki. All right.
I think we might have lost your audio, Tom. I don't know if you've managed to turn yourself on mute. There he is.
Am I back?
You're back, yes.
Right, hold on. Let's try this. Am I hearable now?
You are, yes.
Great. Right. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Yeah, I'm Tom Rumbelow, so I'm the policy lead on everything Open RAN at DCMS, sitting in the Telecoms diversification policy team. So I'll talk a little bit here today about kind of the background for why central government's getting involved in this. You know, what's our rationale and kind of what are we starting to do about it, and then I'll touch a little bit on the implications for places and local authorities at the end. So very quickly, our story begins in July 2019 with the publication of the Telecoms Supply Chain Review, which highlighted a national vendor dependency, which in turn exposed a lack of resilience and national security risk. This fundamentally derives from the fact that over the kind of past couple of decades, there's been a massive consolidation in the vendor supply market for mobile networks, which has led to, at the time, Huawei, Nokia, and Ericsson as our three vendors of mobile equipment, RAN equipment in the UK. And since then, Huawei has been, taken decisions been taken to remove them from UK networks, so leaving us just with Nokia and Ericsson. So obviously, it's a potential quite critical dependency on just two suppliers there. So that led to the formation of the Telecoms Diversification Unit, in which I sit, and in November 2020, the publication of the 5G Supply Chain Diversification Strategy, in which we set out our vision for a more competitive and diverse supply market, which in turn should increase the quality and the kind of levels of innovation and resilience within our networks. That has manifested broadly in this strategy. This is kind of the high level look of what we're trying to do. I'm sure there's a few kind of nuance and details missing, but we have £250 million that the Treasury have kindly given us to take this forward over the next few years. And it's built on three main pillars of work. Firstly, working with our incumbent vendors, so working with Nokia and Ericsson, one, to secure them, make sure that they're kind of in a healthy position and kind of continue to supply our networks in the short run while developing the strategy, but also to kind of bring them along on that journey with us as we look to move to this kind of more diverse market. Second is attracting new vendors to compete in the short run. So we're trying to fill that Huawei footprint and trying to move us back up to 3 or 4 scale vendors who can compete in the short to medium term. Because there are a number of others that are just not operating very heavily in Europe and the UK at the moment. So trying to work with them to enter the UK market. And then as our kind of like mid to long term solution, we're looking to accelerate Open RAN and similar kind of open interface technologies, kind of fundamentally disrupt and alter the way that we build networks and our network architectures to kind of make a more sustainable level of diversity going forward. And that's all underpinned by kind of two cross-cutting pieces of work. One, working to influence standards and increase UK presence and visibility at those standards development agencies. And two, allying with international partners as well. This is a global problem. There's a number of high-profile international allies who are working on this and making sure we can work as a coalition with kind of a unified voice to address this challenge globally. But of course, today I'm here to talk about Open RAN. So why do we care about Open RAN? Why is kind of central government getting involved in this? And we think it's basically a really critical tool in kind of busting barriers to entry and fundamentally shifting that market structure. So firstly, it removes the need for scale. And as Julie touched on, you can now have vendors which are supplying quite specific smaller components in the supply chain, often softwareized. So there's no need for kind of physical manufacturing plants. So you can have much smaller, more agile players kind of entering the market without the need for the literally billions of dollars that the incumbents pump in annually into their R&D teams, huge operations, as well as the hardware manufacturing side of things. The cost of switching for operators is greatly reduced. As I said, if we're moving towards kind of plug and play interoperable model, more software based, then the actual cost of changing the suppliers for operators become much lower. There's much reduced friction. So it's no longer case if you have to literally rip out all the physical infrastructure from your previous supplier and rebuild the whole thing, kind of a years-long process. It can now, in an ideal utopia, almost be done at push of a button if you're just changing kind of the software. Although there's some way from that, and that in turn kind of leads to greater network resilience. If for whatever reason vendor X had to exit the UK market, went under, suffered a cyber attack, whatever, you can then relatively seamlessly transition, hopefully, to a new supplier and really mitigate the negative impacts on kind of UK telecoms networks. Obviously, that comes with this, you're building greater competition, you're building greater diversity into the network, and I'm not going to teach you kind of economics 101. I think we all know that that's generally deemed to be a good thing, greater innovation, and hopefully kind of better quality and better choice of products for those network operators, flowing through to better outcomes and better services for consumers and businesses. And finally, for the operators, there are hopefully going to be commercial benefits in and of itself, the shift in moving to Open RAN and softwareized networks. We've seen kind of Open RAN evangelists around the world. I think most notably Rakuten, a network operator and conglomerate in Japan, who have rolled out one of the world's first Open RAN networks, and they claim that kind of operational costs have been cut by kind of 30 to 40% by moving to this model. There are real commercial benefits to the operators to do this as well at a time where their margins are being squeezed from both sides. So there's kind of an inherent motivation as well. So there's a whole load of reason we think that this is a really positive shift in the networks. But what does good actually look like? We've been thinking about this kind of as we've been developing the strategy and going on, like what does good like? What's kind of the right outcome for us? So at the back end of last year, we set this ambition, which was for a little over a third of UK traffic to pass over Open RAN sites by the end of the decade. We think this is kind of sufficiently ambitious that it is moving the needle and pushing things forward from what would be happening status quo, but also definitely within the realms of achievability. And we've worked this up kind of through really extensive industry engagement, and particularly with our network operators, BT3, Vodafone, and O2. Because they're the ones who actually have to deliver this, and it has to be kind of achievable within their kind of procurement cycles, within their 5G rollout plans and so on. And all four of them are co-signed up to this. This is a really good example of how government and kind of the industry is working very closely together in this and working hand in glove to try and deliver something which we think will kind of deliver shared benefits kind of for kind of the citizens, for our networks, and for the operators themselves. But we also need to kind of touch on what is Open RAN, like what does Open RAN itself mean, and what's exactly a good definition of that. And we kind of looked around the various industry bodies, and there wasn't really a good definition. There wasn't a clear what does a good Open RAN site look like, what characteristics does it possess, what attributes does it possess, in order to deliver on all those benefits that we talked about earlier, to ensure that it can do those things. Because obviously there's kind of potential for a degree of kind of like bastardization of like the vision there, as kind of market forces pull it one way or the other. And so we're trying to say like what does true Open RAN look like. So earlier in the year we published a set of Open RAN principles, again worked up closely with industry, and they've been really well received. We've been really delighted actually with how they've been received. I highly recommend you can go on Gov.uk, read the document. It's not too long. It's I think about 4 pages. And it's not a technical document at all, but at a very high level, the 4 principles that we set out are: 1, open disaggregation, which is kind of the fundamental tenet of Open RAN that Julie was just talking to. You're taking one big black box end-to-end solution and disaggregating it into a number of smaller boxes, smaller components. which interoperate through kind of standardized interfaces. This leads on to the second point there, that those interfaces are standards-based and compliant with industry-based driven standards. There's a really need for that as we're moving towards kind of that plug-and-play vision of the future. And thirdly, actually demonstrating interoperability. And Julie talked about the CIPRI interface, for example. Although that's a spec rather than like an industry standard as such, it's in theory should open up that interface, but due to kind of proprietary extensions and management practices put on top of it, in reality, it's just not the case. So actually, not just theoretically being standards compliant, but actually being able to demonstrate that solutions are interoperable in the real world, and vendor X's radios can work with vendor Y's CUs and DUs baseband. And finally, implementation neutrality. We're very aware of like over standardizing and kind of concerns that raise in kind of limiting innovation. So by kind of keeping the process neutral up to the point of implementation, can be technology neutral. It means that suppliers can innovate, they can add their own special source, they can continue to innovate, and then all the benefits of competition that comes with it. And then the network builders, the network operators, they can actually deploy it in the way that suits them. They can be flexible in how they deploy it. So what are we doing? How are we kind of striving to get towards that and the role that we're playing? Kind of three strands to this. Firstly is product development, ensuring that we have like really secure, reliable and performant Open RAN products. And the big first step we've taken that is the Future RAN competition, affectionately known as FRANC, which we launched last summer and announced the winners of just before Christmas. And so it was a £36 million pot, which we spread out across 15 projects, kind of consortia of network operators, suppliers, innovation networks, universities, and all UK based, to develop some really quite cool products there and quite cool technologies, ranging from all the way through from like just power efficiency, how can make networks more energy efficient, all the way through to AI and kind of the kind of automation and orchestration of networks of the future through a component called the RIC. Second string is true and performant interoperability, ensuring those products genuinely can interoperate, and we are striving towards that plug and play vision of the future. Yeah, so the first step was that we funded Sonic Labs. As you can see, we do like an acronym, Sonic, which stands for the Smart RAN Open Networks Interoperability Center, which is like, to my knowledge, I still think the world's only genuinely neutral lab, interoperability labs. All the others are affiliated with operators or vendors of some kind, I believe. Yeah. There's a neutral interoperability lab where vendors can come in, fail fast, build commercial relationships, understand how their technology works outside of their own labs in a neutral environment, and start to build interoperability there before they go into the operators' labs, and it gives them kind of that a missing step. And secondly, as I touched on, we published our Open RAN principles, which set out what we believe good should look like in kind of the interoperability world. And finally, driving adoption and scale. There's no point in developing really good and interoperable Open RAN products if no one's actually buying and using them. So we're working kind of on the demand side as well to ease the onboarding ramp for the new Open RAN products. So I said earlier, we've developed our public ambition, that 35% ambition there with our network operators, and we've already started doing some kind of other barrier busting. So we've set out a timeline with our network operators publicly for the sunsetting of 2G and 3G networks over the next 10 years, which means that new entrants to the market won't need to develop kind of UK specific 2G and 3G products, because they know that they're being sunset, and they can focus on 4G, 5G and eventually 6G products, and I'm really specific and be kind of future targeted, rather than having to back develop products to try and retrofit. So what does all this mean for local authorities? New physical needs. I mean, I won't repeat everything that Julie said. It has much more extensive than what I could say on that. But I think there's kind of definitely a need, as well as all the great positive stuff that she said, that authorities will need to be considerate of kind of potential changing to kind of planning requests and things like that. There'll be a need for greater building of fiber to connect those kind of centralized, virtualized processing units to the remote radio sites, and also need to build kind of data centers, data hotels, as more and more of that moves away from the edge. And for rural authorities, we think Open RAN really presents a really key opportunity to build connectivity in rural areas. As I said, by moving the actual physical hardware away from the edge, you don't need to send out teams of engineers to build it and maintain it. I remember hearing from one of the network operators, they had a site somewhere in Scotland, Scottish Highlands, and they said every time they did a repair, it cost them 40 or 50,000 pounds because they had to send out a helicopter to get their engineer out there. But by kind of bringing all that back into a data center in more accessible areas, it makes it much more manageable, and you can have better connectivity out in those rural areas. So what are we doing support? We have the DCA program, which my colleague Nick, I'm sure, can talk a bit more about on the panel later on. We're exploring the use of trials in different environments to understand really what are the challenges, what are the practical implications of this. And we're also looking to develop a bit of an Open RAN toolkit, which hopefully will give local authorities and public procurers of Open RAN a bit more confidence in their understanding technology and what that actually means to them. But please do tell us as well. I think we're still at our early stage of exploring what Open RAN means for places and local authorities and government. So any suggestions are really welcome. Please do feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure we can get my email address distributed kind of to the guest list afterwards. So very keen to hear from all of you. And that's me. Thanks very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom. It's really helpful to understand that larger context, I think. So we are going to welcome Julie back on stage with us, and I'm going to introduce two new characters. We've got Nick Wiggin and we have got Paul Clegg, both from DCMS. So let's wait till we're all on stage. Just add Paul as well. There we go. Brilliant. We've got everyone. So before we dive in with questions, let's introduce our two new faces. So Nick, can you please give us a brief overview of who you are and where you come from, as they say?
Thanks, Vicky. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, great to be part of this panel. And yeah, I sit within DI, work closely with Paul and Tom, and I joined DCMS just over a year ago, actually, to lead on stakeholder engagement around the Digital Connectivity Infrastructure Accelerator program, which I'm hoping a lot of people on this call will be aware of, because it is a program which is dedicated to rolling out use of public sector assets for use in local and regional authorities for small cell and macro cell technology. So we're in the middle of the pilot program phase at the moment, working with 8 different regions, with all mobile network operators actively involved and all of the major infrastructure partners. So it's a fantastic program, which is really working closely hand in hand with regions across the UK, and we have an early adoption group as well, which is running throughout the pilot program, which is actually helping to share and disseminate learning from the pilots to other local and regional authorities that want to learn more how to do this. And of course, there's a synergy, as Tom mentioned, with the Open RAN and diversification policy going forward. So great to be involved. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. And Paul, over to you, please.
Thanks, Vicky. Hi, everyone. So originally, in the 5G testbeds and trials teams, I was responsible for the design and development of the rural connected communities pilots, and then West Midlands 5G. So I had primarily an interest in place, working with local authorities to support them in driving 5G development and adoption in the areas. Given the 5G program is now coming to an end, I'm pivoting towards Frank, and I'll work around Open RAN, but trying to manage that space between the two worlds almost, which is why we kind of suggested this would be a really useful session based on feedback from previous sessions that UK 5G have run for us. So really very interested to hear from everyone about how you think Open RAN can affect you and what more government can be doing to support you take advantage of what is quite a big priority for the government at the moment, and one where we'd really like you to come along on this journey with us. So that's why I'm here today, and looking forward to hearing from you all.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. So just a quick reminder to people, I have had a few people that have sent me through some direct questions, which is brilliant. Thank you for those. If you have any other questions that you would like us to put to the group, please do use the chat function so that we can make sure we cover off any immediate queries that you have. So we're going to jump in with some quite fruity questions that I've had sent through to me. First one, which is something we've not really talked about too much so far, is security. So question here saying, how do we address the security dilemma that Open RAN presents without having to take the responsibility of taking all of the kit and testing every single component of it? And Julie or Tom, maybe I'll come to you for thoughts on that one, please.
Yeah, I mean, I can start on that one. I mean, having been at a very good event last week where all the Frank projects were coming together, the Future RAN competition that Tom was pointing to. I think, you know, security is a concern here. You know, probably something we didn't point out in the presentations is, you know, what are the got yous with Open RAN, and certainly, you know, as you add more vendors into the chain, you've got more complexity. You know, who's responsible for ensuring the end-to-end security of that chain, managing it, operating it, and you know, these are all issues that are there. But I think as part of the selection of Frank projects, certainly that we were hearing from last week, that, you know, security was mentioned a number of times across those projects, and is an area that we do have some of the Frank projects are actively looking at. So yeah, it's a good question, a good point. I think you know, Open RAN isn't everything isn't pinned down and perfect. It is still relatively early days, I think, as well for Open RAN. But yeah, absolutely, security is an area where we are, I think, as the UK, we have expertise and we can really contribute to that area.
Brilliant, thank you.
So I don't know if Tom wants to add a bit to that.
Yeah, very happy to. Yeah, Julie's exactly right. I mean, security is absolutely front of mind throughout. And we set out in the Frank kind of competition guidance when we launched it that 5 key priorities, and one of them was security. It should be kind of front of mind for every single project, even the ones that aren't purely security focused. It's absolutely, we work really closely with the National Cybersecurity Centre. Some of you may know Dr. Ian Levy there. We work very closely with him and his team on the security of mobile networks. And it's a really, really hard question. Some of you may have seen kind of reports from the European Commission, German government, I think the US government have kind of all issued reports on Open RAN security and highlighting a number of the emerging challenges there. And we're not shying away from those at all. I'm wary that there's some stuff that I probably would like to say, but we're probably not quite ready to say yet. But I would say just like rest assured that it's, you know, being strongly considered kind of at central government level, and we're really working towards kind of a response to that, as well as really embedding it kind of from day one in everything that we're doing and making sure that it's a primary concern.
Brilliant, thank you very much. That's great. This is an interesting question. So what would you do if you were a major vendor? Would you see this as a threat to your business or an opportunity? Which I think is a very good question. Tom, you kind of talked a lot in your presentation about the fact that you've worked very closely with industry, you've worked a lot with MNOs. I wonder if that work also included working with vendors and whether or not you have a view on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, right? Like, it is a direct threat to their business. So I don't think like we can kind of sugarcoat that. Like, yeah, if you have kind of a duopoly position in a market, and we're trying to break that up, like it is a threat to them. And you know, but we do fortunately have a really positive working relationship. We understand where they're coming from. They understand where we're coming from. And I think there's also an element of you know, Huawei was the market leader, and government has removed the market leader, so we've done them a favor as well, kind of giving with one hand and taking with the other a little bit. But we're working really closely with them to try and bring them along on the journey. And there are differing positions between the two as well. And I think they both understand that, you know, they are suppliers, they need to respond to their buyers, and the operators are kind of saying loud and clear that this is the direction we want to go in. And if they don't respond, they're going to get left behind and their market share is going to be eroded. So they need to keep up with that.
Get on the train, basically.
And they are both talking about how they're kind of developing their own suite of Open RAN products at the moment.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you, Tom. This is an interesting one. So Paul and Nick, I might come to you on this one. What do you think that local authorities can do to accelerate the deployment of this infrastructure to areas that don't have the commercial argument for them? So, Paul, you referenced obviously the work that you've done in pulling together rural connected communities. It's something when we've run these events before, we always get asked about, what does this mean for rural areas? So interested in your take on that one.
Yeah, I can kick off, and I'm sure Nick will have some insights to share as well. I think what we've seen in areas that have been able to do this, so traditionally, of course, we know that operators are very leery about investing in areas where there's no return for them, and often these areas with, say, a reduced population, low traffic, it's hard to justify building out there. We've seen areas that have managed to do that. They've built a business case, so they've been able to aggregate demand across an area, across multiple sectors. So, for example, health and social care, tourism, and they've been able to present that in a unified way to an operator and say, look, we have this amount of demand in this particular area. We can demonstrate that. We've run some use cases maybe, so there's evidence behind that demand, and being able to demonstrate actually there is a need for investment here. And I think last week we heard from Bournemouth and from Manchester, and there are others around the country. I'm sure Dorset may want to chip in. Sunderland, of course. It is difficult. It's really, really hard. And we know there are lots of barriers in local authorities for why this is hard. You don't have the time, you don't have the money. Sometimes maybe you don't have the right expertise in the right place. But once you find a way of overcoming those barriers, whatever they are, I think the ends justify the means. Investing in that, pulling together demand across an area, being able to present a unified business case, a strong business case, and that's what happens to create that compelling argument for industry.
Brilliant, thank you. Nick, did you want to kind of build on that?
Yeah, I just think, just to add, I think being in the right place at the right time, knowing where to go to find the right kind of information. I think what the Digital Connectivity Infrastructure Accelerator program is all about is providing tools and sort of guidelines for local authorities to understand how best to accelerate the rollout of this infrastructure. So we're some of the work streams are quite simple and straightforward in terms of making access to standard agreements that local authorities can use to engage with mobile network operators. We've been trying to sort of raise awareness of the endorsed and approved suppliers of infrastructure, the likes of sort of Cellnex, Freshwave, Ontix, the MBNL's Cornerstone. We've been working hand in hand with the Barrier Busters team to really help local authorities understand how best to sort of engage with these infrastructure providers going forward. And I think also, initiatives around sort of asset management, which is what the DCIA pilot is all about, to try and understand where the right kind of public sector assets are that can incorporate these small cell and macro cell technologies, will go a long way to creating a great street scene in urban areas. So, we're here to provide reassurance that, when Open RAN deployment of different types of solutions come about in urban areas, that we can learn the lessons from progress that's been made by DCIA.
Brilliant, thank you, Nick. Julie, you've got your hand raised there.
Yeah, I was just to add to what Nick and Paul were saying there. I think as well that traditionally you see new technologies like 5G kind of being targeted into the urban areas and where you've got the densest populations first, but Open RAN's kind of an interesting one in that actually the first Open RAN deployment that we've seen announced in the UK from Vodafone is actually rural deployment. And I think as the technology matures, there is this sort of question mark around how well Open RAN systems will perform alongside the traditional, more highly integrated systems. And it probably will take a while for the technology to mature and to reach the performance levels that you get from a highly integrated system. And I guess in rural areas where you don't necessarily have the capacity demands on a network that you have in an urban area, then you can kind of get away with deploying things like Open RAN earlier, while you're still getting to that sort of top performance levels. Whereas in urban areas, you really don't want to disturb your existing network until you're happy that everything's working. So actually, I think Open RAN, in contrast to what we normally see in this industry, I think it's the rural areas that are going to lead the charge on this, as opposed to necessarily the urban ones, and those sort of smaller cities that are traditionally last to see rollouts of new mobile infrastructure. I think if they work together with the industry, invest in networks, there's an opportunity there to support the kind of the soft rollout of Open RAN.
That's really great perspective to hear, Julie. Thank you. And I know there'll be lots of people on the call that will be reassured to hear that. It's very nice, as you say, to hear that turned on its head, for instance. So we've had some really nice questions still coming through, so thank you for those. Tom, one for you here. Interested to hear more about the international partners and peers that DCMS is working with on Open RAN. How has that gone? And are there any learnings from other markets pressing ahead with similar work?
Yeah. I'll be careful here because we do have a whole separate international team, and I don't want to cause an incident, a diplomatic incident.
Let's try not to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do my best. But we're working very closely with the people you'd expect in this. So we work very closely with the Five Eyes security network. So that's Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and ourselves. So kind of multinational kind of security network there, and truly work on kind of one, security of Open RAN itself, but also like the security of networks more broadly and the role Open RAN can play in that. As well as kind of countries that have kind of key strategic interest in this space. So obviously Japan and NEC both have, Japan with NEC and Samsung in Korea are kind of two major players who have announced partnerships with Vodafone in the UK on this, and are kind of looking to expand more into Europe. So they kind of have more strategic interest in Open RAN. And as I mentioned, Rakuten earlier as a mobile network operator in Japan, who've been a real evangelist of this. And then there's obviously work very closely with the European Commission and member states as well. On this, we really want to kind of be aligned with them on this. But obviously with Nokia and Ericsson being European companies, there's perhaps some slight differences of opinion there, but we still have a very constructive relationship. Also we work very closely with the Indian government as well. A huge telecom sector there, and obviously just a massive market. So we work very closely with them. And in terms of like lessons learned, frankly, we are not. This is generally not kind of back patting. We are world leading on this. We've done more than any other country in this space in terms of investment, in terms of thought leadership, and so often these conversations are kind of us sharing our learnings with them, which I think is a really great position for the UK to be in like a really critical kind of future tech area, which perhaps is rarer than it should be these days.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Paul, pleased to see your cat made an appearance. It's usually mine that interrupts proceedings, isn't it? Julie, over to you on that one as well.
Just to add what Tom's saying there from the international dimension, I think it's worth highlighting that it's not just governments that are pushing for Open RAN. I'm going to kind of see a lot of the work that DCMS are doing here as rather than a direct intervention, it's actually an acceleration. It's just accelerating what the market is doing anyway. And if you look at groups like the ORAN Alliance, that's a sort of a standards group that is formed by the mobile network operators, and that's all about the mobile network operators saying, well, we want more diversification, we want more competition in the vendor markets, and it's about the industry itself sort of leading the charge on this. So I think just to make clear on the international dimension, yes, there are at a governmental level there's collaborations going on, but very much this is coming from within industry. And I think that's very important that we let the market lead on this, because they know best where they want this to go to, and I think the injection the funds that we've got through the various competitions are just, they should just be supporting and accelerating rather than dictating to the market.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Julie. And just building on that, so we've heard kind of repeatedly throughout this morning that MNOs are playing a really important role here. As you say, Julie, they're kind of leading the way on this. This is something that they want. We talked about kind of one of the benefits of this being that from a costing, that actually more vendors in the market leads to more competition, which hopefully leads to better prices. We also, I think it was Tom, you were talking about the fact that MNOs are also facing their margins being squeezed right now. To what extent do we think that kind of better costs through more vendors will trickle down to recipients, or so local authorities, places, businesses, consumers, seeing those cost benefits of shifting to Open RAN networks?
Okay, did you want me to take that one?
Well, you can take that. I'll open that to anyone, but you can take a crack at it. Go on, Julie.
I can start on that one. Yeah. So I think that the theory is that there will be cost savings from moving across to these new architectures, and there are some quite bold claims out there from Rakuten, who have developed their network on a virtualized architecture around the kinds of cost savings that they've been able to incur. And that you can look at their sort of pricing strategy that they've applied there for mobile subscriptions, and they are extremely competitive in the market. Now, whether that will be borne out by traditional operators who also have legacy infrastructure to run alongside that remains to be seen. But I mean, personally, I think more what we'll see is that the price of data packages from mobile operators will sort of stay at a similar level. If you look historically at the way the average revenue that operators get per user has gone over time, it's stayed pretty flat. But the thing that's changed is the amount of data that people consume.
Yes.
So if you actually look at the cost per gigabyte that people are consuming, that's obviously dropping at a huge rate. So to keep it's all about keeping up with user expectations. And I think we probably won't see, if there are cost savings, we probably won't necessarily see them come directly through in terms of our data bundles being offered for less. But I think we'll see the size of those data bundles are more unlimited.
What you get for your
data,
money.
What you get, the speeds, the throughput, the quality of service levels. I would hope that would change. I mean, the other point as well, as when we start to think about greener networks, I think there is a big tick for Open RAN networks in moving towards greener networks and more efficient hardware platforms, if we can diversify the hardware platforms, so that the power consumption of different platforms is something we're going to be looking at in the Proteus project, for example.
Great.
So hopefully that will be a direct benefit coming through as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Tom, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, I agree with everything that Julie said. I thought it's kind of a good opportunity, and we'd be remiss not to give a shout out to our good friends at Ofcom. I mean, we're really lucky to have a very strong independent regulator here in the UK, which is really consumer focused, and a big reason for kind of, as Julie said, they're kind of the cost per gigabyte kind of dropping over time. We're lucky to have a really constructive relationship with them working forward on this agenda, and they're always keeping us honest and making sure that the consumer interests are being considered as well. So I think we give a shout out to those guys.
Brilliant, thank you, Tom. This is an interesting question we've had Soup and Bell that I'm going to open up to all of you who would like to take this one. Should education/public institutions that have a large campus footprint be looked upon to pilot Open RAN to support technology providers develop and test their products and services, as opposed to the current practice of simply delivering campus connectivity? Really interesting question there. Anyone got any thoughts on that one?
I would say yes. I think universities are a brilliant place to start testing some of these things. Certainly from the cities that that we've looked at. Sometimes universities can actually be in in historic buildings, and traditionally be areas where it's quite difficult to get to deploy traditional infrastructure. So for me, university campuses are a really great opportunity to deploy sort of neutral host networks where you're actually working with the industry to try and deploy solutions in a way fits in with the environment, and sort of adds capacity to the public mobile networks, but also at the same time sort of trying out these more flexible architectures. And I think, you know, within universities, we've got some fantastic teams within the UK working around security algorithms, working around things like network elasticity, some of the the virtualization of network functions, and giving, you know, by actually having networks on site and a relationship with operators. I think it's a great opportunity for universities to be able to showcase and drop in, you know, some of their innovations into these networks and work well with the operators. The other nice thing about universities is typically they own the actual the land and any of the you know, then they might have existing infrastructure, some fiber there. A lot of them have the data centers already as well, which are all very nice places if you want to put in a few extra racks to run a distributed unit or something like that. You know, all these issues that people point to, where sometimes if you try to do a full city, getting access to the street furniture can, you know, have some problems with it. If you're starting nice and relatively small around, you know, you're dealing with the estates team of a university. So I say, yeah, absolutely. You know, that was actually one of the lighthouse application areas we were suggesting to other councils we were working with, was around a university.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Julie. Paul, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I completely back everything Julie just said. I think it's a real opportunity here. You know, we have some world-leading academic institutions in this country, in this area. And given that Open RAN, it's a relatively immature technology, there's a real opportunity here for academia to work with new entrants, with public sector organisations to start to establish a foothold in these emerging market segments. There are real opportunities to start creating some very high value niches and build capability in key skills and services. So definitely, yes. I mean, yes, please.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. And Nick, coming to you as well on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that you know, educational and public institutions, you know, could be typical of high demand areas, and you know, that would be a good focal point for testing and trialing Open RAN solutions. So coming back to Julie's point earlier on in the presentation, that, you know, naturally it's easier to deploy in rural areas. We understand the challenge in urban and high demand areas, you know, such as, you know, public institutions, stadiums, and so forth. Therefore, we are orientating some of our work to look at that requirement and understand how better to support deployment in high demand areas.
Brilliant, thank you, Nick. Another question that's come through to DCMS colleagues. So what is DCMS's strategy on the usage of Open RAN as risk mitigation of the 2G, 3G sunset and transition of these devices to 4 and 5G, specifically with critical devices like emergency utilities, etc.? Who fancies taking a stab at that one?
I think it's probably one for me, and this is a tough audience.
Putting you through your paces this morning.
Yeah, I know. So the question was, yeah, what's strategy for Open RAN as a mitigation for the 2G, 3G sunset and kind of use cases that supports, right? So yeah, we were kind of developing with the 2G, 3G kind of sunsetting timeline with the network operators, we worked incredibly closely with BEIS on this, business energy industry. I forget the S, that department. But obviously they're in charge of everything, you know, like smart metering, emergency services network, those kind of things. You know, all those kind of critical use cases that were really dependent on 2G. and that was built into the timeline we had, and that's why the actual kind of final 2G sunsetting, I think the date is 2033, I think it is, 2034. So it'll be kind of moving away from kind of 3G networks, industrial strategy, thanks Dave. Moving away from 3G networks first, because I think most of the critical dependencies that are in the use cases are on the 2G network, and kind of slowly phasing that down and planning to build up that capability in our 4G and 5G networks. Kind of the role in Open RAN in that, I think, is kind of somewhat secondary. I think if we're thinking of those kind of use cases and ensuring we can support those going forward, the architecture itself, it doesn't really matter. So it's kind of a slightly a bit of a red herring, I think, in my opinion. As long as that they are being able to support it, then that's the main thing. And as long as Open RAN is kind of good enough to do that and sufficiently secure, reliable, performant, then we're very happy for Open RAN to play a part in that. But
brilliant.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you, Tom. And one final question that has come through on the chat just now. There is a parallel move to open Wi-Fi architectures as well, disaggregating different elements of the technology. Is that also relevant for smaller CSPs and local authorities? Will it be linked to Open RAN for cellular? Who fancies taking that one?
Yeah, I can kick
Go
off
for
very
it.
briefly.
Go.
I can kick off very briefly. I mean, long story short, yeah, like the move to disaggregated Wi-Fi is a trend that we're very aware of, but we are also, a limited team. We only have so much resource, so our focus, as set out in the supply chain review and diversification strategy at the moment, is on the RAN, because that's where we think that the most critical dependency is, and the potential biggest impact of any kind of negative shocks are. We are kind of the telecoms diversification unit, not the RAN diversification unit. We are, we're always looking at things like, open Wi-Fi, looking at diversification of the core network, those kind of things, satellites, those kind of, they're in our peripheral vision, but it's not really our primary concern. What we are thinking about those through projects like within the Frank projects, and that we do have projects looking at kind of open Wi-Fi and open RAN and how they can integrate, how public and private networks can work together and cross over there. I think we have one looking at satellite applications as well. So we are kind of trying to keep this broader picture in mind, but like our kind of laser focus is on Open RAN. So I hope that's not like too much of an evasive answer.
No, it's great. Thank you, Tom. Julie, I don't know if you had anything from just kind of your broader work, of any kind of thoughts on the open Wi-Fi piece as well.
I guess just to say that I mean, within 5G networks, people talk about having a network of networks, and I think as Tom was saying there, that increasingly we talk about wireless connectivity and telecoms connectivity, and it can be via a whole range of mediums. So as far as I know, that the open Wi-Fi area, that it's sort of less progressed as compared to within the cellular side of things. But certainly, I think that the ideal is that all these networks, including things like Satcom, Wi-Fi, come together and interoperate, and you create slices throughout them. I think the steps in terms of getting there and actually integrating these things. But definitely, it's a good point, and definitely one to kind of keep an eye on. But we probably have enough to get our teeth into with respect to Open RAN for mobile networks initially, I would have thought.
Brilliant, thank you. So one final question, and I'm going to come to each of you in turn to answer this, so be prepared. We've heard a lot today about Open RAN, what it is, the potential various benefits. What do you think is the biggest opportunity that this offers to local authorities? And I am going to come to Paul first on this one, please.
Oh, thanks, Vicky.
That's okay.
I think it's kind of echoing what I was saying earlier. I mean, it's a developing market, right? That there are gaps that can be filled, and local authorities as owners of place they've got platforms within those places where there's opportunities to test Open RAN and to drive that technology forward, to move it through the TRL levels, to get it closer to market. You know, working with labs, working with local SMEs, attracting local expertise to work on this, working with academia, you know, and Tom can attest there is money coming for this at some point. And I think there are real opportunities here. You know, the technology itself may not be completely clear to those who aren't technically minded, but if you see it as a means to an end, if you look at the problems in an area, and if you look to see how the adoption of advanced technologies can help you address those problems in your area, think about Open RAN as part of those networks. Now, Open RAN, it is the future in many ways for the reasons that we've been talking about for the past hour and 50 minutes. So just think about Open RAN when you're thinking about your broader digital connectivity plans, and accept that there is a role for you, you know, in kind of bringing together all these different elements within a community to make that happen.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Nick, coming to you next on that one, please.
Yeah, so I think for local authorities, the real benefit of Open RAN is choice, because ultimately, you know, there's a risk of a sort of monopolistic situation with the, you know, short number of incumbent suppliers. So I see this as an opportunity for local authorities. My ask to local authorities is to consider having a point of contact for industry to engage with, to have these conversations about different technologies and solutions in place. There's a real momentum out there with a number of regions and local authorities putting in place digital coordinators and digital champions. Equally, I think the challenge goes back to the mobile network operators to have a point of contact. And we've seen through recent DCIA events, you know, that there is a real ambition there to sort of simplify the dialogue between the network operators, the private networks, the neutral host providers, and the infrastructure providers to make it easier for local authorities to engage with the industry.
Brilliant, great answer. Thank you, Nick. Julie, coming to you.
Okay, I'm trying to choose one because I think there's quite a few across us. I mean, I think there's just going back to the point of you know, that technologies are traditionally rolled out first in the urban areas. That there is an opportunity here for local authorities to, I guess, recognise that Open RAN might be at a relatively early stage, and there are operators there looking to have that sort of soft start. And I think, you know, around that there is an opportunity to engage with the industry, have that public-private investment to actually bring operators and bring investment into infrastructure into places which might not have you know, traditionally appeared to be the first choice for operators to roll out new services. So I think, you know, kind of bringing that investment in infrastructure in, but also ensuring that it's done in a way that is open and creates a hub for innovation, so that you can attract businesses into your area.
Sure.
To, you know, to really make use of this connectivity. So yeah, that for me would be, there's a lot I could go on quite a list. It's difficult to pick one.
No, that's good. That's great. Thank you, Julie. And last but not least, Tom. I don't know if it's good to go last. You've had time to think of an answer, but potentially everyone else has said what you were going to say.
Yeah, I think it's a good get out of jail free card. I can just say, oh, yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said before. Yeah, without wanting to labour the point, I think like rural connectivity is a really big one for kind of rural authorities. I think there's the stuff like Julie talked about earlier about, and kind of just reducing like the kind of the aesthetic imposition, I guess, you know, to move a lot of the physical infrastructure away, and I guess like the kind of like planning complications that can come with that. And I think it's like kind of touching on the points earlier about about campus networks and different use cases. Like we've seen kind of what Sunderland is doing with their kind of smart city network, which is using Mavenir and Open RAN specialists there to roll out that smart city, and we can start to do some really cool innovative 5G use cases. and the flexibility and kind of potential to scale and grow that Open RAN offers you over more proprietary solutions means you can start to invest in that infrastructure now, and then it can keep up as it goes because it's softwareized and it's more flexible. So those kind of use cases and kind of the enablers of smart city type applications, I think is a really interesting opportunity for local authorities.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you to all of my panelists and to Julie and Tom for their presentations today. Really, really interesting discussion. And thank you everyone for feeding in those questions, some really challenging ones there to put our panelists through their paces. So thank you for that. We are nearly at the top of the hour, which means we are nearly out of time. But two things I wanted to just flag to you before we close. The first is that those of you who are not familiar with our website, there is a section of the UK 5G site that I'd like to draw your attention to. You can see the URL at the bottom of your screen there. It's a hub that we launched at the end of last year, which is specifically targeted at places, so designed to help local authorities, regional authorities and LEPs to understand how to deploy digital connectivity and infrastructure. There is information around local community engagement, infrastructure, coordination, leadership and execution, procurement and partnerships. There is a dedicated section on the DCIA program within that as well. And it's full of insights, guides, top tips, talking heads from people from local authorities up and down the country who've been there, done that, and are sharing their sort of insights and learning. So I'd really recommend you take a look at that if you're not already familiar with that section of your site. It's hopefully a really valuable resource for people. And then the second thing to say is that the final event in this series is happening next Wednesday. It's a networking event. So we're running it on the Remo platform. Very little talking from our side. It's really about providing a forum for different places throughout the country to come together, to talk, to discuss some of the things that we've discussed in today's session. Some of the things that, for those of you who attended last week, we were talking about how to build business cases for digital connectivity. So discussing those points and anything else that you want to discuss. We'll have representatives from UK 5G and from DCMS on there as well. So if you'd like to kind of use that opportunity to share ideas, challenges, pain points, brainstorm some ways to bust through some of those barriers, then please do join us next Wednesday morning. We'll also be sending a feedback survey out after this event. We would encourage you, if you have 2 minutes, just to please fill that in. It helps to make sure that the topics that we're covering and the events that we're running for you are really helpful and that they are hitting the mark for you. And that is it for us for this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all our speakers and panelists. And stay cool, and I hope you all have a pleasant rest of your Thursdays. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.